There's been a lot of talk, obviously, about what happened in yesterday's Cup Series race and talk about the weekend in general. I think a very successful weekend for NASCAR as a whole. I know there were a lot of concerns about this being an international race and, still concerns about the logistics of going from Michigan all the way down to Mexico City. And now the teams have to turn around and go back to Pocono. I think there are certainly some logistics in the schedule that can be improved if we do this again. But a very popular winner in both series. Obviously, Suarez getting a home win, but Shane Van Gisbergen winning the Cup Series race. I think an international driver winning an international race for NASCAR, I think, is huge for the sport globally. But we have to ask the question because, as Marty Schneider was sure to remind us, the very first words out of his mouth when he went to interview SVG after he won, welcome to the playoffs. SVG is a full-time driver this year. It's not like Chicago in 2023. This does shake up the playoff picture, much like Harrison Burton's win did at Daytona last year. A driver outside of the top 30 in points is now guaranteed to finish in the top 16 and will be in the playoffs when it comes time for that 10-race stretch in a couple of months. So, Brandon, I'll give you the floor first. Is it fair to compare SVG's Mexico win, where he admittedly had a huge margin of victory, was absolutely dominant, as opposed to Burton stealing a win on a super speedway? Is it fair to compare those two situations? And then when you look at this as a whole, is this going to be kind of a wasted spot in your mind, or do you think SVG could maybe surprise some people? We do have the Roval in the round of 12 this year.
Yeah, Harrison Burton's win, I feel like it was a little bit different than SVG because of all the road courses we still have left to go for SVG to win, and I was just having it queued up here so I could think about it, but I can't see I cannot, and my phone is blowing up for no reason. I don't really know why. It's just deciding to do that now, but I see it as a little bit different for SVG, simply because of the team he's with Trackhouse Racing, and I feel like the Wood brothers are in a little different. They were Penske aligned last year too, but I feel like they're in a little different place with Josh Berry. But I just feel like SVG has a little more chance to back up his one win this year before it's all said and done, and maybe has a way to sneak his way into a round if he wanted to. We'll have to see.
Yeah, Matthew Owens and I were having this conversation earlier today. He's picking SVG as kind of a sleeper for the round of 8 now, and we do have Sonoma coming up, as well as Chicago, where he's won obviously 2 years ago, and maybe could have been in the mix again last year. Obviously, he had an issue take him out early, but and then Watkins Glen as well. He nearly won last year. He had that epic battle with Chris Buescher, so wouldn't put it past him to go one better and take the win this year. So he could potentially be riding on 20 playoff points. Plus, if he wins any stages or anything like that could play a role as well. But even then, I think it's going to be tough for him to get out of that first round there at some really challenging tracks. But he's still learning. In some cases, has only been to one time or not been to at all. But if he can get there, obviously, golden opportunity for him if the Roval, allows it for him in the round of 12. I think absolutely he could perform very well there. And if he wins that race, then he'd be on to the round of 8. But, I've been going back and forth with a lot of people on this. And I know even NBC's Lee Diffie was talking about this. And obviously there's that connection with Australia and New Zealand there for those two. Lee's been following SVG's career for many, many years in supercars and everything. But, I sound like a broken record on this show because I feel like I say it once a month whenever something controversial comes up. But I think it's possible to hold two beliefs at the same time. And once again, in fact, I do. SVG's drive was absolutely phenomenal. Nobody can take anything away from that. I think they said it's the largest margin of victory. NASCAR man pulled this up. Largest margin of victory at 16 seconds and change since Kurt Busch won a fuel mileage race at Texas in 2009 and won by like 25 seconds or something ridiculous like that I don't know if we'll ever see again in this era of stage racing and overtime finishes and all that. But, there was no question. I was just praying that the race would go green and we wouldn't have like a silly overtime restart there because it was clear who deserved to win this race. And SVG thoroughly deserving winner. And I will say thoroughly deserves to be in the playoffs. He doesn't choose the rules of this series here. Those are what the rules are. The top 30 rule no longer exists. And this win puts him, I believe, 30th now in points, to be fair. Obviously, everybody's saying he was 33rd coming into this race. The win and the stage points that he also picked up certainly play no small role in helping him leapfrog a few spots up the standings here. But you can believe all of those things and still also look at the win in your own system and say to yourself, man, this is a situation where SVG is obviously still learning many of these tracks for the first time. I think if you ask most people to be honest, and it's not an indictment on what his ceiling might be in this series or how long he wants to stay in Cup or, how much he can continue to improve on the ovals, to suggest that he could win the championship this year, I think is wildly unrealistic. Now, like we said, he could surprise some people, survive the first round, win the Roval race, and then get into the round of 8 and go a lot further than people expect him to. But I think that is, unless we get some sort of crazy situation in the round of 8, probably his ceiling for this year. For a car that was 33rd in points entering this race weekend to suddenly, based off of one race, just one race, now be guaranteed to finish in the top 16. Again, it's not even so much who wins the championship when it comes to this format for me. I think that the championship standings should be a relatively accurate reflection of how well you run throughout the course of the year.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the Harrison Burton comparisons are not necessarily an apples and oranges comparison to make here. I think that obviously how they won their races is kind of apples and oranges, but where they are in the standings, where they've been running on average this season, it's the same sort of situation. One was 33rd, one was 34th, and now they're both going to be guaranteed at minimum 16th place finishes in the standings. And I understand, and to his credit, SVG, said this in his post-race press conference, and I know Justin Marks and Trackhouse have said similar things. This is why he's here.
Yep.
Because what he proved to everybody in Chicago, that he can go out and win these races, and how many millions of dollars in charter bonuses does that give them for the full season? Obviously, being 16th in points or maybe even higher. Maybe he surprises people, like I said. Wouldn't put it past him. I get all that, and I understand that. But, again, it just comes back to, and I know people are tired of hearing this too, don't hate the player, hate the game. But again, in this case, don't hate the driver, hate the system that allows them to go out and do this. I say the same thing when it comes to Cup drivers in Xfinity. I've never said I have a personal issue with Kyle Busch doing this. He's a racer. He loves to race. And, at one time was owning a truck team even and doing it in his own equipment. More power to him. I just don't I don't love that the rule allows him to do it, but that's not an issue with him or anything. So for people to turn around and say, oh, why do you hate SVG? Why do you hate what this moment is? I don't. And I think, I feel kind of like a hypocrite here in some ways because, I think a lot like Harrison last year, it is a fantastic story. And I want to be talking about, and we are talking about this to be fair, but I want that to really be the primary focus here is how big of a win this is in terms of popularity for a driver who's coming here from a different series, different part of the world to experience the high of winning a Cup Series race once again. And again, what this means for NASCAR on a global scale to be doing this in an international event as an international driver. I think all of those things are wonderful, just as Harrison Burton's 100th win for the Wood Brothers was last year. But again, that's a direct quote from Marty Schneider, right? The very first words out of his mouth. Welcome to the playoffs.
I don't see that as the main without Marty saying that, and he's doing his job. Bless him, he's doing his job. He's doing a wonderful job.
It's nothing against Marty either.
No, it's what he's told. It's the agenda that's laid in place, and that is what happens when you win. You're all but guaranteed into the playoff field, but that's not the main. Still in 2025, that's not the main story on my mind when I see Shane Van Gisbergen win in Mexico City. I see the Kiwi coming over and winning at yet another track where there was rain in the area, and it's the first time we've ever been there. And the other story was there was leaks out of both sides. Which was one of the best quotes of the last 5 years from any racing driver ever. but that's as far as we'll take that. But
Yeah.
I think that just the story was put in the wrong place whenever you say welcome to the playoffs, because realistically, he does not have realistically does not have a great shot of moving anywhere significant. So why would I want to celebrate that? Why would I want to put my praise into that when
Yeah.
it's more of a feat that he won it in such dominating fashion, and just the first cup race in Mexico, that's the story.
Yeah, and to your point, Brandon, that may be the primary thing on your mind. It's certainly the primary thing on my mind. But I do wonder sometimes, is it superseded by the playoff implications on the broadcast mind or on the sports mind? We just, everything is viewed. We went through this with Ross Chastain last year when he won a playoff race despite not making the field of 16. When everything is so heavily viewed through this lens, and then you have people saying, well, you don't like that he's in the playoffs, you must not like. It's just like everything is so primarily viewed through the lens of how this affects the playoffs, or how this affects the cut line, or does this maybe move Ryan? Like, I don't know. It's just
as a race fan, I really don't care about that right now until we get to that point of the year.
I agree, but I feel like it's almost a year-round sort of discussion.
Yeah.
Certainly when NBC would take over, and now when Prime and TNT are taking over here, I think you're once you get close enough, kind of at the halfway point in the regular season, it starts to creep on everybody's mind. And I wish I could be where you are, Brandon. I wish I could watch these races just in a vacuum on an individual level and not worry about how this affects the playoff grid or anything. But again, when it's inevitable, you're going to remember it when it comes up in the broadcast here. And I think that's why, as much as I would prefer not to talk about it, we have to have that part of the conversation here. And again, people asked me last year, like, why can't you just be happy for Harrison? Again, I am. I want to make that incredibly unequivocally clear here. That I can feel like I can hold both of these opinions at the same time. I don't think it's a contradiction to say, you love seeing this win, but you don't love what it does to the playoff system. Because if you don't like the system, then I think you're probably not going to like the fact that a driver so low in points, has taken a playoff spot away from somebody who's on the bubble there. And I got this comment as well. I think this is just more indication of how much of an emphasis we have on winning nowadays. Somebody said, maybe there should be, the playoffs should only be winners. That if you don't win a race, you shouldn't be in the playoffs anyway. And if we have 13 winners, then the playoffs should be a field of 13 or something. I'd rather see a driver who wins a race make it into the playoffs than a driver who's middle of the pack, been running more consistently, but hasn't visited victory lane. Because if you can't visit victory lane, what business do you have fighting for a championship? And I would just point them back to 2022 and we had this discussion in our grid chat earlier today as well. Ryan Blaney and Martin Truex Jr. went into the last weekend, I think, second and fourth or second and fifth in the points, and Austin Dillon winning that race meant Truex and Truex, got caught up in a wreck, and I think it fallen to sixth when it was all said and done. But still, if you're in a situation where the sixth place car can't fight for a championship, but the 26th place car can, because the 26th place car was able to score a victory and pull that out of their hat, while the sixth place car was racking up top fives and top tens, but just couldn't break through to get the win. I get what you're saying about in this era where winning means everything. Maybe, that makes sense, but that it works both ways too, because that locks Truex out to finish no higher than 17th in points. And I don't think that's an accurate reflection of his season, whether he visits victory lane at least one time or not. And even if he does in the final 10 races, he's still locked outside the top 16. So
yeah.
Again, I don't want to beat a dead horse too much here, but I did want to come on here and make sure we give SVG his flowers and everything. It's got nothing to do with him. We obviously are in awe of his talent and how quickly he's adapted to stock cars on the road and street courses. And I wouldn't put it past him to go out and win one, maybe even two more of these races before we start the playoffs and start that process here, because we've got so many of them. But that brings up I think we got a comment here from Denver, perhaps. Let's see if we can find it. There we go. So SVG is the supercar's middle finger to the NASCAR field. It's time for the NASCAR Cup Series to grow the road course schedule and get rid of double up tracks on the schedule. I'm with you on the second point, but I don't know, Brent. I think once you're at 6, that's a full 1 out of every 6 races is a road or street circuit. I think that's probably, I don't know if you want to go much beyond that, because I know Richard Petty was saying this today. He got a comment asking what he thought of the win. I don't know, but I would go so far as to say, like Richard said, road courses are not necessarily traditional NASCAR to begin with. We've had road courses on the schedule for a long time. You think all the way back to Riverside, and obviously Sonoma and Watkins Glen have been mainstays for years. But it used to be we only had 2 of them. Now we've got 6. We're flirting with 5 or 7, depending on the season or what tracks are being rotated on and off the calendar. I feel like if you go any more beyond that, then you are kind of starting to lose, your bread and butter and your identity of what makes NASCAR racing what it is. I don't think you want to go much past that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you said it, the identity of the series is on ovals, and yeah, I think we're at a better balance. If you want balance with road courses, you're at a better balance than you've ever been before now. Because that's embarrassing that SVG was strolling to finish line and still won 15 plus seconds. Well, I think that just shows you the elite talent level that he is coming over and taking on this similar discipline, not completely the same, but slightly similar.
I don't know that it's embarrassing for the rest of the field. I think it's more that it speaks to the elite talent, like you mentioned, Brandon, that SVG is.
I love that. I love Chicago. I loved seeing other teams like, dang, what do we have to do to beat this guy? I like seeing teams get frustrated at someone that comes in and just can whoop their butt without thinking.
Yeah, and we've always, like I mentioned earlier this week, Jeff Gordon, I think is still with 9 wins the all-time leader in Cup, and Tony Stewart was a great road course racer. Obviously, I say he had a little bit of an open wheel background, and when he was racing in IndyCar, it was, the split was still going on, and that series was all ovals, and but he was a great road course racer nonetheless there. And you saw it, with other great champions too. Jimmy Johnson, again, 82 of his 83 wins were on ovals. He only had 1 road course win in his career. So, we've always seen certain guys, certain regulars in the series be able to adapt to it better than others. But even then, we more than ever now, because we have so many of them, you have to be good. It used to be like, it wouldn't be unprecedented for a driver to get pulled for those 2 races of a year to put a road course ringer in the car. And now that's why we hardly ever see ringers in the Cup Series level. Really, the closest thing we have to a ringer is SVG and perhaps guys like AJ Allmendinger, who you maybe don't expect to be competing for wins on a weekly basis, but they circle their calendars when it comes time for these road course races, because they're going to be a threat there. All right, one more comment from Joe here, just hopped on. SVG is now 30th in points, 25 points away from 25th. Can he improve to 25th? I wouldn't put that past him with, how many, again, we've got 3 of these coming up before the playoffs start here. I think that would be a great opportunity. I mean, if he goes out and, between stage points, let's just say he averages 50 points, in each of those 3 races, that's 150 points right there. And if he can continue to improve on the rest of the tracks that we're going to, I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that he could be top 25 by the time the playoffs begin. I think we're using the Harrison Burton comparison here, because at the time that he locked himself in, he was 33rd, just as at the time Harrison locked himself in last year, he was 34th. So it does bring up the rule that used to be in place, and it's the rule that kept Spire Motorsports from fighting for the owner's title when Justin Haley won at Daytona in 2019. He used to have to at least be in the top 30. This came up with Chris Buescher as well when he won that fog race at Pocono in the front row car. It was something to keep an eye on, because I think it was to prevent situations like that where a driver or team that really had no realistic shot at winning a championship, if they stole a win, it wouldn't guarantee them a playoff berth. But again, that's one of the few things that we've changed about the playoff format in recent years, is that rule no longer exists. And that's why we can say with 100% confidence, even though he did just break into the top 30 yesterday, that we know SVG will be in the playoffs. And again, it's not an SVG issue. We wish him nothing but the best and hope he goes out and does surprise a lot of people. But it does have to be, I think, part of a conversation, given how heavily everybody emphasizes this system that we have now on a weekly basis, even before the playoffs actually begin.